Well, it's 7:05. Let's get started. So good evening. Thank you so much for coming and helping to envision the future of the R3 district. First, let's get some technical details out of the way. We have interpretation available in both Spanish and Chinese tonight. I'll take a moment to let our interpreters direct people to those language channels. So go ahead, Ana.
Buenas tardes, esta tarde tendremos interpretación en español. Haga clic en el icono que aparece en su pantalla, seleccione español para escuchar la reunión de esta noche en español y la interpretación, si la interpretación no es suficiente, puede solicitar una aclaración cuando hagamos una pausa. Para hacerlo puede hacer un clic en el icono Raise Hand para expresar su pregunta o solicitar una traducción. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Anna. And Eileen.
今天晚上我们研讨会提供中文和西班牙语的翻译服务。如果您需要收听中文的翻译的话，稍后请点击在屏幕下方出现的这个地球仪图标，然后选择中文，这样您就可以听到中文的翻译。然后在问答环节，如果您有任何问题呢，就点击相应的图标举手来提问。如果您是通过电话接入的话，请拨打星号9来举手提问。谢谢 ，Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eileen. All right, so we will start interpretation and move on. As a reminder, please keep yourself muted during the presentation. We will have an opportunity for Q&A afterward. Please use the reaction raise hand tool if you want to ask a question. If you're calling in, please raise your hand at the end of the presentation using *9. We'll answer your questions. After the presentation, we'll have group discussions to talk about some of the key questions that we have in our presentation. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself and the project team. I'm Eric Anderson. I'm Advanced Planning Manager with the city staff. We're also joined by our consultants, Opticos Design, including Stefan Pellegrini, Tony Perez, Beth Sishan, Russell Toller, Roger Foreman. And we also have support from other community development department staff, including Brittany Whitehill, Edgar Maravilla, Diana Pancholi, and Aaron Freitas. You'll have a chance to meet some of them later this evening. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to get input on the R3 zoning update. This project is an action in the Council's strategic roadmap. It's part of a priority to help create housing options in the city. This meeting is focused on the San Antonio Rengstorff del Medio neighborhood. Future workshops will focus on other neighborhoods. Tonight's workshop will include 3 parts. A presentation overview of where we've been with the project and some options for where we can go. Then we will go into breakout groups to hear from each other about your thoughts on each option. And lastly, there will be a report back. The R3 zoning update is only part of the city's interconnected housing programs. In addition, the city is preparing the housing element, which is a state requirement to plan for more housing and address housing equity. Council direction was to not rely on the R3 update to accommodate those units. A draft of the housing element is under review by the state now, and we expect it to be adopted by the end of the year. We're also preparing a displacement response strategy, which could include affordable unit replacement and tenant relocation requirements, as well as preservation efforts. The displacement response strategy is under review and would apply to the R3 zone with or without this update. Lastly, we're preparing a middle income strategy, which will include an increasing portfolio of moderate income ownership and rental units and homeownership assistance. The R3 update would help support this strategy by creating more middle income units. R3 is one of the city's standard zoning districts, and it's intended for a broad range of residential development types. It covers much of the city and almost all the neighborhoods with multifamily, row house, and other HOA developments. The R3 zone regulates development through standards, which new buildings need to comply with. One of those standards is maximum density, which can vary across the R3 zone depending on the neighborhood. Other standards include a 3-story height limit and limits on floor area ratio, setbacks, and minimum open area, which do not vary. Recently, almost all development has led to relatively expensive row homes, and a few recent examples are shown in these pictures. It's also important to note that state density bonus applies to R3 today, and it could result in buildings more than 3 stories and other waivers of development standards, including lot coverage or setbacks. So why are we updating the R3 zone? As I stated earlier, the City Council has a goal to increase housing options in the city, and the R3 zoning update is a key part of that effort. The city is looking into a form-based approach. This means that the standards focus on the form of the building rather than its contents. For example, a building with more small units would be treated the same as a building with fewer large units. This has several benefits. First, the current framework of densities don't really address neighborhood conditions. Through a zoning code update, we can locate higher densities near transit or services. We can also modulate character-defining standards like FAR, setbacks, and open area to reflect changes in density. Changes to standards can also help create a broader range of unit types, including more stacked flats, which can be relatively more affordable than row homes and other product types. Lastly, with a form-based approach, and by calibrating standards to each other, we can create more flexibility while simultaneously creating more predictability and streamlining the approval process. It also needs to be noted here that there is a state law in effect that says that we cannot reduce residential density or increase constraints on density. So some growth can occur, and your input can help inform how much. Before we get any further, we should define some terms that we're going to be using later in the presentation. One is house scale, which generally refers to separate buildings along a block, usually up to about 80 feet wide. They can include multiple units and are generally up to about 2 to 3 stories. Block scale, on the other hand, refers to buildings that are attached or very close to each other along the full length of a block. So at this point, it'd be good to take a quick poll. The purpose of this poll is to get an understanding of the stakeholders at this meeting. This way we can see if we need to target any missed groups later on. So let me stop sharing, and I'm going to start the poll. So please select if you rent or own your home in this neighborhood, if you own property in this neighborhood, or if you work or own a business in this neighborhood, or none of the above. Okay, I think that's just about everybody. Oh, a couple more trickling in. Let's see. Okay, I think that's enough time. Let me stop it there, and I'll share the results. So it looks like we have about 35% of people here are homeowners in the neighborhood. About a quarter are renters in the neighborhood, and about a quarter are none of the above. So that's good. That's a pretty good mix. Okay. And that poll, thank you again. That'll help us to determine if there are any interest groups that we need to put more focus in reaching out to later on in the process. So here's what we've heard so far. This project started in 2020. We conducted workshops and prepared a development framework that was presented to the Environmental Planning Commission and City Council back in 2021. That framework looked at maximizing development potential. It looked at the characteristics of each site and analyzed how large a building the site could feasibly accommodate. In addition, there was analysis of how many existing units could be replaced at rents or sales prices affordable to those living there today. As a result, the framework presented last year had buildings from 3 to 6 stories. Upon review, the City Council directed staff to go back out and get more input from the community. Earlier this year, we talked to a few different stakeholder groups and heard a few key messages. Some of these included some people wanting more housing, others more cautious about growth. We heard a lot that people were interested in planning for growth with precise plans or general plan update rather than through a zoning update like this. Ensuring infrastructure, parks, and schools can support growth. Creating better access to retail services and amenities. Interest in building new housing near transit. To consider mobility and streetscapes as we plan for new buildings. To protect privacy and greenery as we plan for new buildings. Some people wanted lower parking requirements and others wanted to minimize neighborhood parking impacts. We definitely heard that we wanted to make sure we were reflecting all opinions and not hiding any of the downsides. And then of course, protecting people from displacement and rent increases was very important. So in response, we've prepared an alternative that seeks to address what we've heard with these 5 main points, which I'll go into in more detail. This slide summarizes the growth framework that I talked about. It included these subdistricts ranging from 2 up to 6 stories. The 2-story subdistrict focused on areas with small parcels and no nearby 3-story buildings. The 3- and 4-story subdistricts were in areas with a mix of different surrounding building sizes and parcel sizes. The 6-story subdistrict was just for the sites with the most development capacity and fewest surrounding 2-story buildings. But as I said, we are taking another look at how subdistricts could be different in the R3 zone. Rather than focusing on differences in height, we could focus on differences in scale and character. An alternative framework could have lower intensity districts be more house scale and higher intensity districts be more block scale. These are some alternative districts. As you can see, these images show how buildings can be more massive, including more width and fewer space between adjacent buildings at the higher subdistricts, but not by increasing height. Later in the presentation, we will look at a map of where these districts can go. During your breakout rooms, you can respond to these pictures. For example, is there anything you like about the buildings or things you don't like? Are there locations where some of these buildings might be appropriate, or even some of the previous framework's buildings? We've also put a lot of thought into transitions of height and scale to existing neighborhoods. These pictures show how smaller building scales, including height, width, and depth, can help buildings fit better into the community, despite small step backs and potentially even a 3 or 4 story to 1 or 2 story transition. In addition, we've revised the proposed R3 map and eliminated cases where higher intensity subzones would be added adjacent to lower density neighborhoods. The lower intensity subzones could have new standards, which could limit scale, including height and width and depth, both facing the street as well as along internal property lines. In addition, privacy and screening concerns can be addressed through landscaping. A form-based set of standards can also help support improved pedestrian connections and streetscapes by encouraging connections to the sidewalk and a comfortable walking environment. Publicly accessible open space can be provided through incentives. Next slide. Publicly accessible open space can be provided through incentives. If developers are allowed to build the same amount of building through allowance of an extra floor, new public parks become a win-win, where the community can benefit from the additional open space. The R3 zone could also be an opportunity for small neighborhood-serving goods and services, which increases the vibrancy and walkability of the city's neighborhoods. Later on, we'll ask you about how you feel about these types of uses in your neighborhood and where they might be appropriate. As I said earlier, the 2020 growth framework essentially maximized development capacity. The new alternative map would focus development capacity increases in strategic locations, resulting in smaller increases to overall development capacity in the R3 zone. In addition, R1 and R2 neighborhoods are only adjacent to R3A or R3B. At the same time, we're targeting higher intensities to key destinations like transit and services. So this map shows the San Antonio, Rengstorff, Del Medio neighborhood. And you can see that in the 2020 approach map, much of the area, especially along Del Medio, California, and Latham was designated for 6 stories. In this version, in the 2022 approach map, it's all 3 stories with potential density bonus under state law, which would go above 3 stories. But the block scale buildings are focused around California, Latham, and Del Medio, as well as some areas closer to the San Antonio shopping center. And then other areas that are farther away from the San Antonio shopping center or are already developed with row houses and other smaller scale uses are in the lower density zones, the R3A and R3B zones. As I said, you'll have an opportunity to look more at this map during your breakout groups. You'll also have an opportunity to look at these maps online over the next couple of months and continue to provide input. We'll be asking you in the breakout rooms to weigh in on these 2 maps. You can be thinking about whether we should change any of the locations of subzones. Are any of the previous subzones a good idea anywhere? Where are transitions important? Where would neighborhood serving commercial be appropriate? So that summarizes our alternative approach. Tonight, you'll have an opportunity to respond to these ideas. In your breakout groups, you can discuss these questions like, what do you like in the examples of buildings? What don't you like? Where could they be appropriate? Where should pedestrian and bicycle users be prioritized? Where would you support allowing small neighborhoods serving commercial uses? What do you like better about the 2022 map or the 2020 map? And what other ideas do you have? In closing, I'd like to make it clear that this is not an all or nothing approach. Form-based principles, neighborhood commercial, open space, and other ideas can move forward with the 2020 map, or we can use parts of the 2020 and parts of the 2022 map. Lastly, you may have other ideas that we haven't even thought of yet. But before we go to our breakout groups, this concludes the presentation, so let's do some Q&A. If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and we will have some opportunity to answer questions.
Okay, it looks like we have our first question. We will start with Michael.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, you mentioned that in 2020 you tried to maximize development capacity, but then it sounds like you scaled it back to some degree, and I'm curious why. So, of course, focusing in places like close to transit, this all makes sense, but why not to really try to maximize development capacity given all constraints that already in? So that's my question.
Great question. Thank you so much. A couple of reasons. So the question, if people didn't hear it, is why did we change our approach to 2022 to reduce the overall capacity of the R3 zone in this alternative approach? One reason is to give the public an opportunity to respond to real alternatives. And this kind of helps us get an understanding of where the community's priorities may be and where different parts of the community might have different values and different priorities. So it's really to just start the conversation and provide a way to bring out options from the community. In addition, during this round of kind of informal conversations that we had with different stakeholder groups earlier this year, there was concern about a large-scale growth across the whole city, across the whole R3 zone. And this gives us an opportunity to be a little bit more incremental if that's the direction that the city wants to go.
I don't know how to raise my hand.
Okay. If you're go ahead, Beth, if you want to,
Yes. The way to raise your hand is to go to the reaction. It's the smiley face at the bottom of your screen, and then you'll see an option to raise your hand.
Okay, Boomer.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And I'll come, Becky, I'll ask you for a question after we ask Tim, and then after Tim, we'll ask Matthew, and then I'll come to you, Peggy.
Okay, now I see.
Okay, so Tim, you can ask your question.
Yes, please. Appreciate you holding this session this evening. I'm concerned potentially about density. We seem to be looking through this at like a soda straw as far as individual properties are concerned. Does the city council have a limit on density by neighborhood? And is there an overall density target for the city, please?
great question. We have, through our zoning code, we have a range of maximum densities in different parts of the city. So along El Camino Real, it's not unheard of to see, recent developments that have been 80, even more, 80, 90 units per acre. In East Wisman and North Bayshore, we recently adopted plans even higher density than that. The R3 zone currently, it ranges from 25 to 35 units per acre. And that depends on which neighborhood you're in. Some of the neighborhoods are on the higher end of that scale, and some of the neighborhoods are on the lower end of that scale. Hopefully that answered your question. There is no, the council has not set any citywide cap to density. There's no policy that sets a kind of citywide maximum. But in effect, there are the parts of the city where the density is the highest.
Is there a neighborhood density limit, please?
There is no neighborhood density limit. That's all done through zoning individual properties, which can have an aggregate neighborhood density.
Okay, so next we'll ask Matthew to ask his question. And just a note, we will be closing the session for questions in 5 minutes, but there'll be more chances to ask questions later.
So I was just wondering what form the potential commercial areas will look like. Will they be more autofocus, pedestrian focus? Will they have to fit into the form factor of like surrounding houses or stuff like that? I'm just curious.
So this is exactly the type of input. It's a great question, Matthew. Thank you. This is exactly the type of things that we'd love to hear from you about how you would envision commercial in your neighborhoods. When we say neighborhood serving commercial, generally that does mean the small scale uses that are, like restaurants, cafes, things like that, that aren't going to attract a huge number of cars from across the region. But how you want those uses to be designed and how you want them to interact with the surrounding residential neighborhoods is kind of exactly the type of input that we want tonight.
Okay, next we'll have Peggy ask her question, and if time, we'll have Lee and Simeon.
Oh, hi. I'm having trouble reading the map. What I'm interested in is I would like all the buildings that are 4 stories or higher to be restricted to San Antonio Road and El Camino.
That's a great comment. It's exactly the type of thing that we're going to want to hear in our breakout groups in just a minute. So hold that thought. We'll say it again and we'll write it down when we go.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, Lee.
Yes, hi, this is Lee. I have a question regarding to the map changing between 2020 to 2022. Once you reduce the levels of the stories, are you in general in this area, particular map, you reduce the total units you can build from 20?
Yes,
okay.
Potentially that could have a reduction. It wouldn't reduce from what we can do today. So today, we're actually not allowed under state law to reduce from what is allowed today. But between the proposed 2020 map to the 2022 map, that would be a reduction in the potential future amount of units.
do you have an estimate how much reductions between these two maps?
No, I don't, unfortunately. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get input from the community on the pros and cons of the different maps and how they might want to mix and match them potentially. And once we do that, we'll get a better understanding of the potential feasibility of redevelopment, how many net new units might be feasible on any given property, and we'll come back to the city council at a later date with potential build out projections of different options.
And you don't really need to rezone for this map. Am I understanding this correctly? It's already R3?
That's correct. These areas are all already R3, but what we are doing is we are updating the rules under R3 to better reflect current building types and council goals to encourage more stacked flats and moderate income units.
Yeah, I have the same comments. I would think it's probably pretty ideal to have higher stories on the facing El Camino side and facing San Antonio side. And the inner ones could be lower. Just, you know, I think I kind of feel the same way as the previous person raised the question. Yeah, I appreciate all the questions you have answered for me.
No problem. Yeah, stay tuned and we'll get that comment noted down. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And our last question is Simeon.
Hey everyone. I was just wondering, I know just there's a sizable amount of renters in this R3 zone, as it is a multifamily zoned area. And just looking at the polls in the beginning, and just knowing that a lot of times renters tend to be underrepresented in these type of meetings, I was wondering what the planning group was doing to try to do outreach to the renters to make sure their voices were being heard.
Absolutely. Well, once we finish this round of workshops, we're going to continue to have the websites for continuing to provide input. We'll look at any maybe potential areas where we haven't heard from a lot of groups, or kind of our target number of input from different folks, and then we'll go out and we have a bunch of mailing lists and contact lists for the CSFRA groups and the tenant groups and things like that we'll continue to utilize to try to get input from any populations that we might have missed.
Thank you.
And that's all of our questions.
Great. Well, perfect. Thank you all so much. Great questions. Let's jump into our breakout groups. Hold on one second. Let's see if there's anything. Yeah, you will be assigned a random breakout group, so please just accept it when it prompted. If you're interested in joining a Spanish or Chinese breakout group, please do not accept the group. Hopefully my interpreters are translating this for me. But please raise your hand and we'll put you into a special group, and hopefully we will have enough interpreters to support every language we want. Welcome back. I hope you had an excellent time with your group and provide a lot of great input to the process. So let's talk to someone from each group and get a summary of the big ideas and discussion points that came up. How about group one? I think that was Tony's group.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, we had a great discussion, a lot of input, and Lee is going to summarize for our group. Lee, thank you. You're muted, Lee. You're muted. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. Our group kind of like the style R3-C block style. We think it's consistent with most of the other buildings in that area. And the only concern is not the top one of the R3-C with, the ones we like is more like Mediterranean style, the lower R3-C. block style. And the transition comments are, we would like the size to, if the large building is next to a smaller, we would like to limit the height of the building. And we would like to, if the buildings are above 3 levels, we would like the buildings to be built off either El Camino or San Antonio. And the group all agree we support open space and green space. But we didn't get a consensus if we would like to trade off, like building higher to trade off for open space. We would also like to keep the park currently we have at the corner of Ortega and California Street. And we believe that's a public park. We should be able to keep them. For the commercial buildings, we would like to most possibly have one bike shop and maybe a bubble tea or coffee, some kind of cute outdoor commercial retail space of El Camino. If it's possible, I believe we would like to have another retail, maybe sandwich shop, some small restaurants, cafe, with some small eats at the corner of California Street and Rengstorff Avenue. And that's summarized what we discussed in our group.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Lee. That sounds like a lot of really great stuff. You know, a lot of really great input, especially on the commercial and the character of buildings and the style. That's really good stuff. How about room 2, Russell?
Yeah, I couldn't get any volunteers to share, so I'll be doing it. I guess maybe we need to start handing out prizes for some of these groups, but happy to share. We had let's see, we had some mixed feelings about the first topic about the 2020 approach versus the 2022 approach. Some felt that you know, we needed to allow increased density and height in order to make an impact, in order to affect, you know, meet the goals that the whole project is trying to meet. Some people were a little more hesitant about allowing, especially the 2022 approach that allowed up to 6 stories in the R3 zone, obviously with, you know, parking and traffic impacts. In terms of the transition tools, we heard some interesting comments about who those are designed to protect, and some good comments about not using those tools just to protect single family residential homes, but also some of the smaller apartment buildings in R3, to really pay attention to the surrounding context regardless of zoning and type of dwelling that is abutting those new projects. Also the types of transitions. Some people were a little concerned about being a little too strict and limiting potential of new projects through transition regulatory tools that are there to address transition. Let's see. When it comes to streetscapes, yeah, I think everybody was fairly on the same page about wanting nice streetscapes, porches, dooryard stoops. Some interesting comments on the idea of requiring public open spaces. Some concern in some people's voices about how those trade-offs might be set up. So what might the quality of those spaces, those public open spaces that might be provided, and what might be used as exchange for you know, the flexibility to developers. What exactly can they can get out of in exchange for that? Small scale commercial uses, we had pretty much consensus. It seems like everybody likes the idea of having something useful to walk to, especially when it's neighborhood scale, especially if it doesn't have a parking lot in front. So we talked about maybe limiting parking minimums in those spaces. And so a couple of people mentioned the crossings as good examples of what that might look like in R3. San Antonio and El Camino is a good intersection where those might be allowed or encouraged. Yeah, and I think that wraps up our comments on group 2.
Great, thanks so much, Russell. Yeah, so definitely hearing some issues where there might be disagreement, but definitely some issues where there's agreement as well. A lot of shades of gray and subtlety there too, really interesting. How about Roger's group?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks. And we also got a lot of good discussion, and Tim is going to summarize for us.
Roger, are you able to share your notes, please?
Let's see. I believe
well, Roger's hopefully pulling that up. My name is Tim Mather, a longtime resident here. I live in the Crossings, been here in Mountain View for many years. With regards to which is the better map, personally, I favored the 2022. However, I was definitely in the minority amongst our group. I think the stronger support is for the 2020 map on that. With regards to the density, this really with regard, not the density, but the stories of the building seems to be the issue there. So split, but in our group, the 2020 seemed to be the greater interest on that. Certainly a topic on where is the density going to be increased? Is it just San Antonio Road and El Camino Real, or is it perhaps spread out across the neighborhood? Off of that, I don't think that we came to a clear consensus as a group on that particular one. Next one, please, Roger.
Or the top, or
whatever the order is, whatever makes sense. Yeah.
You can go up here.
Okay, so just going through your notes here. Again, whether it's the 2022 approach or the 2020 approach, most of the group favors the 2020 approach rather than the 2022. But I think that we're looking at, if we go to the 2020 approach, was 3 stories, seems to be the consensus there. And probably mapping that to the 22, it would be the medium house scale is probably what we're looking at then off of that. Interest definitely in maintaining 3-story height limits off of that, not going higher, which kind of contradicts with the 2020 model or map off of that. I don't think that we should be less than 2 stories. I would say pardon me, the group thinks off of that. So the medium house, again, the R3A, as much density as possible to support the housing in the neighborhood. Personally, I don't agree with that. Again, I would like to see some sort of density restrictions across the neighborhoods in the city, but that's my personal opinion off of that. I think that we do have support for more open space off of that and possible interest in trading stories for density. So if a builder were to get permission for a 4-story, for example, they would have to come up with whatever park space to open space to accommodate that. I don't know what that ratio would look like, but there would need to be some sort of standardized ratio that the city council agreed upon that. But don't just give away, if you will, a 4-story. No. That 4-story would come at the expense of more open space off of that. A definite need to put transit close to the housing. We already have VTA as an example. We also have the community shuttle. Probably need to do a better job of advertising the community shuttle. I'm not sure how many people even know that exists off of that. I think that's it for this particular slide. Next notes, please. We talked about the crossings at Mountain View as a way to do the transition off of this so that we don't get these ugly, jarring transitions from old to new off of that. I'll just note then, I actually happen to live in the commons, or pardon me, in the crossings off of that. I'll just note that that was a single development, if you will, a single site at the time. That's probably not applicable to most developments these days off of that. And that's a 20-year-old model. I think it's worked well, but I'm not sure how applicable that is going forward, in which the plots, the entities are probably much smaller. Hopefully we don't have anything that is within a block that is very jarring, like the photo and the bottom right there off of that. I'm not sure how we're going to get around that. It would be nice to be able to have some screening through landscaping that did that. The concern with the screening through landscaping is to get that to be mature so it's actually effective is a long process. That's probably 10 to 20 years by the time the trees and the vegetation grow to they're actually providing that screening. So we would need to find another way in addition to that landscaping to somehow provide screening for that. Also interest then in more shade, whether that's through trees, some sort of, I'm not sure arcade is the best word, but overhangs, etc. But definitely need more shade here as well. Next slide, please.
This is all really great info, but we have a couple of more groups that we want to get to by 9 o'clock. So maybe just a couple of high points for the remaining stuff. Thanks.
I think we've already covered this one. Next slide, please. Interested in mixed use here, commercial integrated with residential. Not separate spaces, or probably not separate buildings, but in the building itself, and some sort of small scale commercial, whether that is a food court, a cafe, whatever, no bars, doesn't need to sell more liquor, but integrated. And again, perhaps there's a limit on that. Hypothetically, maybe that's 5% of the total residential space in that particular building. And with that said, I think I'm done. Appreciate it. Back over to you, Eric.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. A lot of great information there. Let's move on to Beth's group.
So I'll big thank you to my group for participating, and I'll be representing their thoughts. Wanted to start off by saying there's support for bigger buildings, and the belief that the 2020 map had R3D, which was taller and filled in some more granular descriptions of the map. We talked about architecture style and balconies as a potential interest, and ways to promote development. Even although there's support for open space, we don't want that open space to limit development. The supporting trees along the sidewalk, but making sure that they're deep roots so that pedestrians are okay, and it doesn't break up the sidewalk. And two final notes are that the open space might even be best tucked inside the building, like in a courtyard. And finally, there's support for commercial within a neighborhood, potentially multiple commercial stores next to each other, so it becomes more of a node. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Beth. Good stuff there. Martine's group.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks to my group for the great discussion. Edgar will be providing the summary.
Hello, everyone. Similar to the other group, we tried to get someone to present today, but we could not get someone to do it. But I will try to do my best here to put everyone's ideas into perspective. Pertaining to the first question of focus of district on different scale characters, there was a unanimous agreement that density and height there should be more density and more height in general. There is existing apartments out in that area that currently exceed a 6-story. I believe I heard up to 8 stories in one. And I will try to keep it quick, just keep in mind on time. Improved transition in height and scale. The group did agree that Even if you do allow more height, there's still a way that you could do that in a way that respects the adjacency standards and the requirements that you could add step backs on those areas. Pertaining to improved pedestrian connections, I think this is where our group was the most excited and about the update, and particularly increasing sidewalks and maintaining the walkability, as well as including more activities for cyclists, bicycle lanes, ensuring that there's more of a connectivity to existing bike lanes, as well as prioritizing open space and greenery. So really the focus was pedestrian scale, and they really enjoyed it and agreed that that should be the focus. As far as allowing small commercial uses, the group felt it is important to allow commercial uses, but there should be a focus on neighborhood serving commercial uses that particularly will serve the neighborhood, and to the extent possible, scattering those uses throughout the R3 areas and not just concentrating them in one place, which may not necessarily further promote walkability within these neighborhoods. And pertaining to the last question, create a moderate growth option. The group overall felt there is possibility for more density here if ultimately the goal is to provide more housing, particularly affordable housing, but not only affordable housing, just in general housing. The density should be kept to the 2020 plan, if not a little higher. And of course, they also acknowledge that this is an ongoing conversation and there's a multitude of opinions, but maybe there's a comfortable middle ground that can be achieved.
Great, thank you so much, Edgar, and Martine and everybody in your group. So that's it. We do have a couple of more slides to share just in terms of what is coming up next, but I won't keep you too much longer. First of all, if you feel like you had more to say, or if you have a neighbor that couldn't make it, please log into our website here, mountainview.gov/R3 zoning update. This URL is also on the flyer or the notice that you might have received. You'll have an opportunity to provide comments on all of these topics through that website. This module for this neighborhood will be up probably by the end of the week. So right now, the previous neighborhoods that we've done are already up. This neighborhood will be up in the next couple of days. And after this, we'll carry on through the end of 2022 with more outreach, and we'll develop options and return to the EPC and council for their review in early 2023. And we're expecting adoption in late 2023 or early 2024. So again, thank you all again so much for joining us tonight. Hope you have a great evening and a great week, and please contact me if you have any questions. I may be able to stay after for another couple of minutes if anybody has any quick questions right now, but otherwise have a great night and thanks again.